We've heard everyone talk about capital cities, blue chip areas. That is the only place to buy real estate. And if you really want to ensure capital growth, that's the only place you should be looking. Well, the thing is, I don't agree. In this video, what I'm going to do is break down some of these graphs and stats around how regional Australia has really performed over the last 12 months and why there is such a big opportunity out there. Even today, after having grown for the last 12 months, why I will continue to buy in these areas as well as some smaller capital cities. If you are interested, keep watching. Hey guys, my name is Ravi and welcome back to Personal Finance with Ravi Sharma. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button because I talk about real estate, cryptocurrency, and financial freedom. In this video, we're going to go through a report by PropTrack around some of the statistics of how, COVID-19 has really affected net migration, how we've seen that translate into property prices growing, and why I think this trend has been long existing before the COVID variant actually came in. If you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I've been called a regional fanboy only because I look at the logic and don't really get caught up in the emotions. Something I want to make very clear is that I intend to live in Sydney for the rest of my life. I really love it here. I was born here and have moved around a few places within Sydney. So my idea of capital cities, well, emotionally, I love it. I can never live out regionally. I think the pace is way too slow for myself personally, and I would love to stay in Sydney. But that's the emotional side. When I look at investing, well, I don't need to invest in Sydney just because I love it. I need to look at what the numbers say. I need to know what the statistics say, and then match that up with the narrative and the emotions behind what's happening with consumers. Now, we really are forgiven when we look at capital cities and say,
well, that's what I've been taught.
It's because our parents and their parents probably all bought within Sydney and Melbourne and have seen price appreciation through the roof. The thing is, wage growth hasn't really existed. So when you look at affordability, back then it was actually more affordable to buy in relation to how much they were making and how prices were. Fast forward into 21, 22, we're seeing a real big divide between what we can afford and what's actually a good investment. One of the worst things that you can take on as advice is when people say, well, it doesn't really matter if you buy a house as long as you're in that area. So go and buy an apartment, at least you're there. That is the worst piece of advice because they don't even consider supply and demand. In the same location that you could have, say, 3 houses that, maybe accommodates for 12 people, if there was 4 in each home, now you can build up by like 20 stories, which means 1,000 people in the same land area. So this is something to consider when you are looking at investing or when you're buying a place for yourself as well. COVID-19 has disrupted the status quo of many facets of modern life, and housing is no exception. Long lockdowns, border closures, and more time spent at home have caused many to reassess their lifestyle and living situations and continue to do so. Housing markets in regional Australia have been one of the prime beneficiaries of this dominant trend. Throughout 2020, we saw the pandemic drive demand for more space, larger homes, and change in lifestyle. With the rise of remote working, the ability to work from home has seen many people making a sea change, tree change, or shift to regional areas. These trends have continued in 2021, and nowhere has this been so evident as in regional Australia. So what net internal migration is the amount of people going out of that area to move permanently versus how many come in. So as we can see here, we've had the largest amount of internal migration into Queensland being 30,785 net gain. And if you compare that, well, you've really got that coming out of New South Wales and Victoria. For obvious reasons, lockdowns really did play a part, and people realized that it was so much more affordable to go up to Queensland and live up there compared to what you can buy here. And if you see the same thing in Brisbane, you're probably paying 700 to 800K, but with substantially more land and in a better location. Housing values in regional Australia are currently rising at the fastest annual pace in at least 35 years and has increased by almost 30% in the year to September. This is what we've been focusing on with our buyers agency, not because I personally love the regional areas. I personally love Sydney and capital cities, as I've mentioned, but that's an emotional response. When I look at logically, where did the numbers make sense? Well, regionally it did. And that's why we had been focusing on that niche. We didn't look at Sydney, we didn't look at Melbourne, and we didn't also focus on,
hey, let's help people buy their own homes.
We were focused on,
hey, our clients want to make as much money as possible, get the greatest return on their investment, and that's why we went into regional Australia.
Now the thing is, I did not expect we were going to have 30% growth in some of these areas. I was going in and saying, well, you know what? In normal circumstances, based on my own experience and my own portfolio, I could see, 7 to 10%, maybe if we're lucky, 11 to 12% in some of these areas. But to have the narrative play out of people wanting to move into these areas, increasing that demand, plus huge amounts of money supply in the system, people saving because they weren't traveling, a combination of these two things meant that we did have substantial amount of growth in these areas. Now, do I think we're going to grow by 30% later this year? No, I don't think so. However, I do think there's some trends in play that you need to keep an eye out on, because it's going to be swept under the rug as people going,
well, that was because of COVID. Now when it reverts back to the mean, everyone's going to lose out in regional areas.
I don't think so. It's not like people are moving to Queensland only for a year later to say,
maybe I'll miss New South Wales, maybe I'll come back.
No, it doesn't work like that. This outpaces the already strong growth in metro areas, representing a particularly exceptional period for Australian housing market. It's been driven by low interest rates and a shift to regional areas with limited housing inventory. In addition, the mining industry has continued to experience large growth in line with strong commodity prices and adding to the regional renaissance. These changes have culminated in elevated demand for regional property, with regional areas again outperforming metro areas in the past 12 months across a wide array of PropTrack metrics. So this is very important to understand, is that although we can be told that Fred down the road made 100K on his property, I saw an article come out yesterday about how you were making X amount of money every single day by having a property in Sydney. What they don't really calculate is that's an average, and it's probably being brought up by the top end of the market, because that's where people are going, there's so much demand, there is only a finite supply of these top end properties, and that is just reverting up that average. In regional Australia, if we're looking at the average buy price, it's like $400,000 to $500,000, right? When we're looking for our clients, we average anywhere from about $300,000 to $450,000, and that for us, it seems like the golden pocket. The other thing to consider is it's still being noted as, well, people wanting to move, remote working conditions, it'll all go back to normal. I don't think it does. This is the new norm. The regional renaissance and workforce changes. Hybrid work is resulting in a decoupling of employment from locality, weakening the once strong gravitational pulls of CBDs. Better than expected experiences working from home and accelerated remote work adoption through the pandemic has given many an opportunity to live in areas that previously would have been impractical. As a result, regional centres are seeing rapid population growth. So again, supply, demand. Let's just really strip it all back. You can see days on market, you can see listings, you can see a wide range of metrics, and we use that as part of the research. When I come onto this channel, most people don't want to know about those things because they're like,
oh, I'm freaking bored, man. Just tell me what's happening.
So I try and break it down and say, well, all of those metrics come down to one key thing: supply versus demand. With population growth, yes, it's not the only factor to look at when you're saying, well, there's more demand now, because if you had more supply as well, and there's new land being cut up, new apartments going up, well, population growth doesn't really matter. But it is a key indicator of what's happening when it comes to demand. Now, the thing is, something you need to understand with regional areas is that many of these areas don't even have the zoning from councils to actually build high-rise apartments. So that's limiting how much more supply can come onto the market. When you compare that to the capital cities and there's a new suburb that gets built, well, guess what? After about a year or two, you've got DA plans to come in and build 2,000-3,000 more apartments. Despite the multitude of challenges COVID unearthed, many office workers embraced the flexibility to work remotely and made their move to regional Australia. More affordable housing and natural amenities have given many of these city skippers a high quality of life relative to urban areas. Specific drivers found to be correlated with regional relocation include health and well-being, housing affordability, safety, culture, natural environment, and a sense of trust and belonging. Last year, taking advantage of remote workability, many opted for the sea or tree change, with a net 43,000 people exiting capital cities in favour of regional areas. That was the biggest net influx to the region since the Australian Bureau of Statistics recorded began in 2001. It's fairly obvious where the world's headed. We've already got conversations about the metaverse and being digitalized and everything being through the internet and Web 3.0 with crypto. It's just going to be interesting to see what people are thinking when they go,
well, I'm going to go into commercial real estate, buy office spaces, and then hope that people are still going to come back because that's the norm.
I don't think the norm exists in that capacity anymore. You can see it with, yes, we've seen an influx of bars and cafes having a great time in CBDs, but I don't think that plays out for much longer. I think it's people just going,
okay, I can finally get out, let's just go everywhere.
I'm doing the same thing. Just want to go, want to experience things. And I think that's going to have an influx in the beginning, and then we see it slow down. And I think this is coming in 2022, where people are going to realize, hey, did I really want to spend 2 hours on a train travel trip back and forth to go to work, which I could just do at home? I don't think so. We can see here quarterly net internal migration, greater capital cities combined. And we can see this completely drop off over the last 12 months. Now, in saying that, we were always in negative territory. People were always moving out of capital cities into regional areas, and it was always happening. It just happened at a more accelerated rate of growth. Now in this graph, we can see historical house price growth in the quarter-ended percentage change. Now again, this is using averages, right? So I wouldn't go, regional areas, because to be honest, I personally wouldn't be buying in Northern Territory regionally, and I probably wouldn't be buying regionally in Western Australia and many parts of Queensland, purely because they're driven by one economy, which is basically the mining sector. So if I want to get a more holistic view, I'd probably look at New South Wales regionally and the rest of Victoria. So if we go to rest of New South Wales, we can see here the growth between 2011 to about 2016 has been fairly lackluster, right? Nothing so great to report on. However, it's important to keep in mind this is an average. I've got properties in regional New South Wales that I actually purchased in and around, say, 2014, 2015, and they were actually performing a lot better than these graphs suggest. And this comes down to a couple of things. One, when you look at an area like rest of New South Wales, it's a big area. You need to find some suburbs will grow more than others, some locations within those suburbs will grow more than others, and then it comes down to the streets as well. This is where it comes down to the research. I cannot stress this enough. Just because things are great now and you can buy property basically anywhere and it goes up, this won't last forever. And I'm not coming out here and sort of causing fear for anyone that's just purchased. I'm just saying be careful, because when we see the dynamics change, and it's going to flow out, and it will, everything works in cycles. When things slow down, people are going to realize what were the good investments and what were the shitty investments, the dud investments as I like to call them, and that's when people are going to feel the real pain. Just going out there and simply hoping for the best is just not good enough. You need to be accountable for what you're buying. And then as you can see, in 2020 to 2021, we've just had enormous amounts of growth. Again, this says 8%, but keep in mind this is quarterly. So even seeing these numbers down here, these are quarterly changes, and it becomes very impressive when you annualize this. Now looking at the regional population shifts and myth busting, counter-urbanization is not a new trend, but one that has been hugely accelerated by the arrival of COVID-19. I agree with this so wholeheartedly. This idea that it just happened because of COVID. Like, it seems like everyone's always got an excuse for something. You know, when the market's going up, it's like, oh, I've got an excuse for that. When the market's going down, I've got an excuse for that. We just need to look at real data. If I was coming out here and saying, well, property prices are going to go up again by 30%, I don't really have anything to really back that by. Well, what I can back things up by is when people say, well, interest rates going up by 1% will cause house prices to drop by 20%. That doesn't make sense because it's never happened. And when we put all the metrics together and we see supply and demand, yes, some areas may consider some sort of growth. Some areas may even drop, but by how much? That's really coming down to the specific locations and specific areas. You can see a huge move. Even though we were looking at Queensland, we can see regionally huge amounts of growth when it comes to internal migration relative to where they're mainly moving out from is Sydney and Melbourne. Now this is an interesting graph here, ratio of median house prices in capital cities versus regional markets. So what this means is the price in Sydney or capital cities relative to their regional counterparts in those states. The higher the ratio suggests that the price of regional New South Wales has a higher ratio to Sydney prices. And we can see that during that 2026 to 2018 sort of slowdown, we saw those ratios actually increase in regional Australia. And then we started seeing that increase occur again as part of the pandemic. Through the pandemic, remote workability and rapidly rising house prices have accelerated pre-existing trends that have seen the southeast coast capitals, Melbourne and Sydney, declining in terms of livability and losing large numbers of people. While Melbourne and most lockdown cities in the world experienced its largest net migration loss on record in 2020, both regional New South Wales and regional Victoria recorded large number of net migration gains. Housing in capital cities is much less affordable than regional areas. If house prices in state capitals are rising relative to regional counterparts, then the state capital is not only more expensive on absolute basis, but is becoming relatively more so as well. Housing affordability varies considerably across Queensland, but the ratio of housing prices in Greater Sydney to Queensland increasing to more than 2 times and even more for regional areas, the Sunshine Coast still retains an affordability advantage over the southeast coast capitals, Sydney and Melbourne. Nonetheless, accessibility problems still remain for younger people and lower income earners a nationwide problem. In previous census period, the top 3 regional destinations for millennials were Gold Coast, Newcastle and Sunshine Coast. The rise of commutable lifestyle hubs. It would seem many are banking on hybrid working, focused work at home, and collaboration in the office becoming the way of the future. Research shows for employers and employees alike, greater flexibility is now considered an essential condition of employment. According to one study, 35% of Australian employees expect to continue hybrid working as lockdowns lift. A second study indicated 75% of workers think their employers will support their future work from home plans. This is major. This trend has been always existing. You'd hear it from people that would, start a new job and they say,
oh, we offer work-life balance. You can work from home whenever you like.
The thing is, when you'd go and you actually work 1 day a week from home, you'd feel guilty as F. And then you'd also have your teammates go,
oh, did Frank not appear at work today? Oh my God, that's terrible.
I'm assuming that's how people talk in the corporate world. I've been out of it for so long. If you were looking at some of these statistics, you can see that during the time of COVID, we've seen average views per listing actually increase at a rapid pace for regional Australia. When you see it for capital cities, yes, they've increased, but when you're seeing the increase occur a lot more, maybe double the pace in regional markets, that's when you can really see the average views are increasing at a rapid pace. This trend has continued throughout this year, with the number of highly engaged buyers per listing almost doubling year on year in the regions, while supply regionally is hovering around record lows, having fallen by more than 30% last year. We definitely have a supply shortage. We have an issue when it comes to supply and demand. And this is where you need to really look at the narrative and look at the numbers and combine the two to really make sense of it. We have a huge opportunity existing in regional markets, but don't get this wrong. It's not just because COVID's occurred. This trend has been continuing and will continue for the foreseeable future. I know where I'm putting my dollar. I hope that this has opened your eyes to going, well, there is a bigger picture to where I'm buying in the backyard. Yes, of course, you're going to have less confidence when you're buying in an area that you've never even been to or never even heard of. So this is why you need to have the right team around you. This definitely is not a shameless plug to go,
hey, check us out for our buyers agency.
Just makes you think that if you are wanting to get access to different markets, then you need to go and outsource that, or you need to spend time and research these markets for at least 6 to 12 months before even going out there and investing for yourself. If you are interested in accessing this sort of content on a daily basis, I talk about articles, I talk about stats, I talk about graphs and things that, we're using in our buyers agency as well. And I share that in the Patreon community. Again, join the VIP Patreon membership, because that gives you access to everything. The weekly audio podcast sessions, as well as the monthly Q&A live sessions where you can ask me anything you like. And we have that available for the last few months as well. It's very interesting to see where this world's headed. I believe we're gonna have a shift not only from capital cities into regional areas, but I see over the next couple of years, a large amount of money flowing out from traditional markets like real estate and share markets into what is the new world, being cryptocurrency and Web 3.0. If you are interested in wanting to keep up to date with all of this and get your head around it, definitely join Patreon and subscribe to this channel, because I bring out about 3 videos a week. And yes, I definitely do enjoy it. If you have enjoyed this, definitely subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks, guys.